Imagine the deck of a Roman warship, where battle-hardened legionnaires suddenly froze in terror. From broken clay pots, dozens of venomous snakes crawled toward them, hissing and preparing to attack. The historian Cornelius Nepos wrote about the naval battle at Pergamon in 184th year before our era, where the Carthaginian commander Hannibal first used living venomous reptiles as a formidable military weapon. These clay vessels with living contents were called the first biological weapon in history, Terribilis serpentum, terrifying snakes. As if from the darkest nightmares, these slippery killers turned proud Roman triremes into floating graves, where warriors fought not only with the enemy, but with nature's own death. Can you imagine the panic of these experienced seafarers when instead of familiar spears and arrows, a living nightmare from myths descended upon them? But this is only the tip of the iceberg of ancient chemical warfare, which began much earlier in the steppes of the Black Sea region. Scythian nomads 3 centuries before Hannibal already possessed the secrets of a deadly potion called Scythicon. Snake venom was mixed with rotting remains of vipers, human blood and horse dung, creating an infernal mixture that killed even with the slightest wound. This poisonous paste was aged for months in clay pots, transforming into a concentrate of death capable of felling even the mightiest warrior. Imagine the troops of Persian King Darius facing these invisible killers. An arrow flies by, leaving only a scratch, but an hour later the agony begins. And it was precisely the Scythians who taught the entire ancient world to turn natural toxins into weapons of mass destruction. Mithridates VI of Pontus perfected this art, creating an entire laboratory of death in his palaces. His court physicians Agari, priest alchemists of the ancient world, worked day and night extracting poisons from the most dangerous snakes of Asia Minor. Like ancient professors of chemistry, they studied every drop of serpent secretion, creating antidotes while simultaneously perfecting deadly potions. This king transformed his body into a living fortress against poisons, daily taking microdoses of toxins. Can you imagine a person who studied death so thoroughly that it ceased to fear him? But the true masters of turning nature into weapons became the Persian Sassanids, who in 256th year of our era conducted the first chemical attack in history against Roman legionnaires. Archaeologists discovered in the Syrian fortress of Dura Europos the remains of 19 Roman soldiers and 1 Persian warrior, killed by poisonous gas based on sulfur and bitumen. This deadly smoke was called gassum mortiferum, murderous vapor, which burned lungs from within and turned warriors into gasping shadows of themselves. Imagine underground tunnels where Roman miners dug passages to the fortress walls, and suddenly they are enveloped by a yellow cloud of death, from which there is no salvation. Could you hold your breath long enough to escape from this gas grave? Even earlier, Greeks in the 5th century before our era poisoned an entire city, using the poisonous plant hellebore to contaminate the water supplies of besieged Syra. This operation was called hydrotoxicum, water poisoning, when natural poison turned vital water into a deadly trap. Like invisible demons, poison molecules penetrated every home, not distinguishing soldiers from peaceful civilians, turning the sacred element into an instrument of mass destruction. Can you imagine the horror of people understanding that even a sip of water could be the last in their lives? This act of biological terrorism was so monstrous that participants of the Sacred League swore never again to poison water. The Roman Empire quickly adopted these deadly innovations, creating entire cohorts of specialists in poisonous substances. Legionnaires dipped swords in excrement in decomposing corpses, turning every wound into a source of deadly infection. These sinister warriors were called veneficari, poisoners whose weapons did not kill immediately, but slowly devoured the victim from within through blood poisoning. Imagine a battlefield where every scratch from a Roman sword turned into a gangrenous ulcer, and tetanus twisted enemies' bodies in death throes. Would you dare to fight against an army where even a superficial wound meant agonizing death in a few days? Finally came the time of the greatest master of poisonous warfare, Mithridates VI, whose laboratory in the Pontic Kingdom became the first center for chemical weapons development in history. His scientist Toxicology, ancient chemists of death, boiled snake venoms with plant extracts for days. The royal alchemists of Mithridates created the greatest invention of ancient pharmacology, Mithridatium, a universal antidote from 54 components, including opium, ground viper flesh, and microdoses of all known poisons. This monstrous mixture was boiled for months in golden cauldrons, transforming into a thick paste the color of clotted blood, capable of neutralizing any toxin. Mithridatism, this was the name of the practice of daily intake of poisonous substances to develop immunity, which turned the king into a living antipode of death. Imagine a person who breakfasted on death every morning, slowly transforming his body into an impregnable fortress against all known poisons. Would you dare to play Russian roulette with death itself daily for the sake of gaining immortality? But Mithridates' true triumph became the operation with mad honey against Roman legions in 65th year before our era. The king's allies, heptachamites from the Black Sea region, used Mel ponticus, poisonous honey from bees that collected nectar from rhododendrons. This treacherous product contained granotoxins, neuroparalytic substances that turned experienced warriors into helpless madmen. Like nature's sweet trap, bowls with golden honey were strategically placed along the path of Roman columns. Can you imagine legionnaires who, after a long march, greedily pounced on this gift of the gods, not suspecting the deadly trap? After half an hour, Roman soldiers began writhing in convulsions, their minds clouded with hallucinations, and their movement coordination completely disrupted. The heptachamites patiently waited for the peak of intoxication, after which they descended upon the defenseless legionnaires like a pack of wolves on paralyzed prey. This battle showed that nature could become a more deadly ally than the most perfect swords and spears. Imagine the horror of commanders, watching their invincible warriors transform into helpless madmen from one spoonful of honey. In his palace laboratories, Mithridates conducted monstrous experiments on prisoners of war, systematically studying the effect of each poison. Royal toxicologists injected various doses of snake venoms, plant alkaloids, and mineral toxins, documenting symptoms and time of death onset. These records, kept on parchments of human skin, became the first scientific database of poisonous substances in human history. When Pompey captured the Pontic capital, he discovered a huge library of toxicological works in various languages. The most terrifying chapter of chemical warfare in antiquity unfolded in the underground labyrinths of the Syrian fortress Dura Europos in 256th year of our era. Archaeologist Simon James discovered the remains of 19 Roman legionnaires and one Sassanid warrior in a narrow counter-tunnel where the first documented gas attack in human history took place. These underground passages were called cuniculi, military engineering structures for undermining fortress walls, which turned into graves for entire squads. Imagine Roman sappers digging toward Persian miners in pitch darkness, not suspecting the hellish trap being prepared for them. Could you continue digging, knowing that every pickaxe strike brings you closer to a deadly encounter? Sassanid chemist engineers used a mixture of bitumen and sulfur crystals, creating gassum sulfuricum, sulfur gas, which burned lungs from within in mere seconds. Persian warriors installed braziers and leather bellows directly in the underground gallery, patiently awaiting the Roman breakthrough. Like demons from the underworld, they pumped deadly vapors into the Roman tunnel, turning the underground space into a gas chamber. Can you imagine the final moments of these legionnaires when a yellow cloud of death descended upon them in the narrow stone corridor? One Persian warrior also died from his own chemical weapon, becoming a victim of ancient technology of mass destruction. The bodies of Roman soldiers were deliberately stacked in a pile at the tunnel entrance, creating a human barricade from their own victims. This monstrous practice was called murus corporum, wall of bodies, turning fallen enemies into a fortification structure. Some legionnaires were still alive when the Persians dragged them to create this macabre barrier. Imagine the horror of a wounded warrior, understanding that he is being used as building material for his own grave. Would you dare descend into such a tunnel, knowing the fate of the previous squad? Roman commanders quickly adopted Persian chemical warfare technologies, creating special units of Gassarii, warrior chemists who possessed the secrets of poisonous gases. Legions received leather masks soaked in vinegar and plant oils, which were supposed to protect against inhaling toxic vapors. These primitive gas masks were called bucca protector, mouth protectors, becoming predecessors of modern chemical protection equipment. Wars turned into chemist competitions, where victory depended not only on warriors' bravery, but also on knowledge of nature's poisonous secrets. The great Roman commander Julius Caesar first systematized the use of chemical substances in military campaigns, creating special engineering cohorts, fabricatores venenae, poison makers. These military chemists developed complex compounds based on arsenic, mercury, and plant toxins, which were applied to siege engines and projectiles. Like ancient alchemists of death, they turned ordinary arrows into carriers of agonizing torment, capable of killing the enemy several days after wounding. Imagine Gallic warriors who considered themselves victors after successfully repelling an attack, not knowing that death was already flowing through their veins. Could you maintain fighting spirit, understanding that every scratch could prove fatal? Roman military engineers perfected Persian gas warfare technologies, creating portable gas generators based on quicklime and sulfuric acid. These devices were called air mortifer, deadly air, capable of generating poisonous vapors directly on the battlefield. Legionnaires learned to use wind as an ally, directing toxic clouds at enemy positions with mathematical precision. Like invisible demons, these gases penetrated every crack in fortress walls, leaving defenders not a single chance for salvation. Would you dare command a fortress, knowing that the enemy could kill your garrison without even approaching the walls? Emperor Trajan during the Dacian Wars applied a combined chemical attack, combining poisoned arrows with smokescreens based on burning sulfur. Roman toxicologists created fumus bellicum, military smoke, which not only blinded the enemy, but also caused suffocation and chemical burns to respiratory passages. This tactic turned the mountain gorges of Dacia into enormous gas chambers, where even the bravest warriors turned into gasping refugees. Can you imagine Dacian chiefs watching how their impregnable mountain fortresses became death traps? By the end of the 2nd century of our era, the Roman Empire possessed an entire arsenal of chemical weapons, including incendiary mixtures based on oil and saltpeter. Military manufactories in Syria and Egypt produced thousands of amphorae with concentrated acids and alkalis. These production centers were called officina chemica, chemical workshops, becoming prototypes of modern plants for producing poisonous substances. Roman legions turned into chemical armies, where every centurion knew the properties of dozens of toxic substances. Would you have been ready to serve in an army where knowledge of chemistry became more important than sword mastery? The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476th year of our era did not interrupt the tradition of chemical warfare. Byzantine engineers created the most perfect weapon of antiquity, the famous Greek fire. This incendiary mixture contained oil, sulfur, saltpeter, and secret components that made the flame unquenchable by water. Military chemist pyrotechnicians called this formula ignis liquidus, liquid fire, capable of turning enemy ships into floating torches in mere minutes. Imagine Arab galleys engulfed in unquenchable flame that continued burning even underwater, turning the sea into a fiery underworld. Could you command a fleet knowing that one drop of this substance would doom the entire crew to agonizing death? Crusaders of the 11th century adopted Byzantine technologies, creating their own chemical weapons laboratories in castles of the Holy Land. Night alchemists used arsenic and sulfur to poison wells of besieged Saracen fortresses. This tactic was called aqua venenata, poison water, turning the vital element into a deadly trap for entire garrisons. Like invisible angels of death, poison molecules penetrated every sip of water, not distinguishing warriors from peaceful civilians. Could you drink from a well, knowing that the enemy might have turned water into poison? Leonardo da Vinci in his secret records described projects for smoke machines based on arsenic and mercury. The great inventor developed portable gas generators capable of creating toxic clouds for storming fortresses. These devices were called machina fumigator, smoking machines, anticipating chemical warfare technologies of the 20th century. Imagine a besieged castle shrouded in poisonous fog from Leonardo's hellish machines. Would you want to live in an era when even the greatest geniuses created weapons of mass destruction? Archaeological excavations in Pompeii discovered amphorae with remains of concentrated acids and poisonous plant extracts. Roman military warehouses contained thousands of clay vessels with toxic substances, ready for use against barbarian tribes. Chemical analyses showed the presence of arsenic, mercury, and snake venom, compounds in concentrations lethal to humans. These findings confirm the scale of ancient chemical weapons production. The legacy of Roman chemical warfare reached our days through medieval manuscripts and Byzantine military treatises. Emperor Charles XV used smokescreens when forcing the Western Divina, and French General Pélissier gassed Algerian tribes. Modern military chemists study ancient recipes, finding in them prototypes of 20th century chemical warfare agents. Snake venoms of Roman legions became predecessors of neurotoxins, and Persian gas attacks anticipated the horrors of World War I. Archaeological discoveries of the 21st century finally dispelled the myth that chemical weapons appeared only in World War I. Excavations in Dura Europos, Pompeii, and other ancient cities discovered entire arsenals of poisonous substances, proving that Romans and their enemies turned chemistry into a science of mass destruction 1,500 years before the Battle of Ypres. Spectral analysis of discovered amphorae showed the presence of arsenic, mercury, snake venoms, and plant alkaloids in concentrations exceeding lethal doses by dozens of times. These findings were called archaeotoxicological artifacts, material evidence of ancient chemical warfare. Imagine the surprise of scientists discovering that Roman military warehouses contained more sophisticated toxins than the arsenals of 19th century European armies. Are you ready to reconsider ideas about the primitiveness of ancient civilizations? Modern military chemists study ancient recipes, finding in them prototypes of nerve-paralytic gases and psychotropic substances. Scythian Scythicon contained neurotoxins similar to modern sarin, and Persian gassum mortiferum anticipated the technologies of chlorine attacks in World War I. Mithridatium became the basis for developing modern antidotes against chemical weapons. Like dark prophets of the future, ancient alchemists laid the foundations of a science that in the 20th century claimed millions of lives. Can you imagine that the recipes of Roman toxicologists are still studied in secret laboratories? Hannibal's snake pots evolved into modern biological ammunition, filled with anthrax spores and botulotoxins. Byzantine Greek fire became the prototype of napalm and thermobaric ammunition. Roman gas tunnels anticipated underground chemical attacks of World War I. The history of chemical weapons shows that human genius is equally inventive in creating both medicines and deadly poisons. Do you realize that every achievement of ancient medicine had its dark military analog? The Convention on the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons of 1993 became humanity's attempt to break with the tradition begun by Scythian nomads 2,500 years ago. But secret laboratories around the world continue to perfect technologies first tested in the dungeons of Mithridates' palace. Modern terrorist groups use ricin and sarin, direct descendants of plant poisons with which Scythians smeared arrows. Snake venoms, once turned by Romans into weapons of war, today save lives as the basis for cardiac drugs and painkillers. The history of chemical weapons is the history of human ingenuity, turned both for good and for evil. Every time modern doctors use snake venom to treat thrombosis, or when military forces apply smoke screens, they follow in the footsteps of ancient masters of chemical warfare. The legacy of ancient toxicologists lives not only in museum displays, but also in laboratories where both life-saving medicines and deadly substances are created. Roman legionnaires who turned poisonous snakes into military weapons laid the foundations of a science that still determines the balance between life and death on the planet.